Hello, everybody, and welcome to CONSERVATISH episode 231. Wherever you're listening, make sure you subscribe, share, rate, review, and you can find me on Instagram at Peter_Feliciano. You can find me on Twitter at Rule62Peter, and you can support my music and my podcast at patreon.com/conservatish. Ladies and gentlemen, the wonderful Tim Wilson. Yay! Thank you very much for coming on, sir.
Very much my pleasure.
Absolutely. Please talk about yourself and where people can find you and support your work.
Okay, first of all, I'm a senior fellow at the London Centre for Policy Research. That's the Herb London, not the London, England. We are at londoncentre.org. We're also, we run a Thought to Action video channel on YouTube and on patreon.com/Thought to Action. My background, just quickly so people know, is that I first came to America when I was 4 years old. I stayed for about 2.5 years while my father worked in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I then went back and ended up joining the British Army for over 30 years. But I spent my time volunteering for things in America because, as I said to them at the time, I learned the Pledge of Allegiance before I learned God Save the Queen. So then I'm basically met an American lady, fell in love with her, married her, moved here, and have been here now for just over 11 years as an American citizen. Proud of it too.
Amen. Especially with the decline of England at the moment.
Yeah, not wrong.
No. Now you became a citizen around 11 years ago. What was the spur of that? What made you feel, you know what, I want to become an American citizen?
As I say, I'd loved the country ever since I was 4 years old, and then marrying an American. And all I'll say is she brought me to her house, and I woke up in the morning, and I love the Lake District in England very much indeed. I woke up that morning, having arrived in the dark, looked out of the window and went, wow. Yeah. I've never seen anywhere more beautiful. Now, I'd already asked her to marry me by that stage, but I was living here, so it was an obvious and easy move to me to become an American.
Absolutely. Was there also, because I've heard you talk in some of your other posts on Thought to Action about seeing the writing on the wall in England regarding especially guns, since that's something you're very passionate about. Was that any impetus regarding your?
It was indeed, and I think I'm very fortunate to have been in the British military at probably the peak of its powers. And as a military man, I was a gun collector and a passionate target shooter, and I did a lot of shotgun work on clay pigeons. I went to Bisley and shot in national and international competitions. I was a competition biathlon shooter. Nice. So I love guns and all the rest of it. And then when we had a couple of incidents with schools, it became obvious the writing was on the wall. The country had been going anti-gun for a long time.
Right.
And I had real difficulty because I was seeing influences such as the British Army being told not to carry their guns in public in case it frightened the civilians. And I'm sorry, I'm missing something. Right. I was willing to lay down my life to defend the freedom of an Englishman and his castle. And yet I wasn't to be trusted with a gun. It was weird. And then, being an officer, as I was, I had legal access to more firepower than the entire police force of the British Isles. And yet, as I say, the police would not issue me with a license for any of my collection.
Right. There seems to be, and it's something similar that I've spoken with. My last guest was actually, by coincidence, living in London. And she and I talked about some of the decline. And the interesting part of decisions like that England made and a lot of other countries in the West, and including the US, have made, is that it's decisions based on niceness. It's decisions based on niceness and what we think it, and what's so baffling and what I appreciate so much about your approach to the Second Amendment in America, especially in the article that you just did with Tony Schaefer. What in the Washington Times was this idea of just because a problem is labeled a certain way, or even a solution is labeled a certain way, doesn't necessarily mean that that's the accurate description, you know, i.e. Black Lives Matter. Okay, well, when some people are against Black Lives Matter, it's not because we're saying Black Lives don't matter. It's because we disagree with the diagnosis,
Discrimination part of it.
right,
Yeah,
and the solutions, put forth.
absolutely.
So the idea that England, well, we don't want people to die, and so we're going to take your guns. And if you don't let us take your guns, it's because you want kids to die. No, 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 no. Let's hang on now. you know,
Yeah.
um,
I mean, I have literally fought for the Western world to be free. And what I've seen through that more than 30-year career, which included combat, is that guns are great equalizers in some ways. And it's the bullies. It's the bullying of the petty bureaucrats in England that took away my guns as far as I was concerned. I was not a threat to the general public. I'm not a threat to the public here. I'm not a threat to anybody unless they threaten me or mine.
right.
And at that stage, as I'm getting older and feebler, and many other people who are disabled and less able, old people, and minorities and poor people in particular, are not allowed access to guns, and that's just wrong. A good person with a gun is no threat to anybody. And the vast majority of this, I believe in the goodness of the American people. I really do. And the vast majority of people are no threat at all, no matter what, with guns. And the gun control crowd have spent decades preaching, oh, no, guns are bad, guns are evil. No, guns are not evil. They're just a tool. They're a bad people. And what disarming the good people does is give the bad people more power.
Right. Now, I've seen it manifest in a lot of other ways. And what I appreciate about the London Center for Policy Research, as well as your approach to this, and honestly, I mean, what I usually go, people who know my show, like, I'm usually much more filthy. So my approach usually to the problems and solutions is a very culture centric, approach,
Sure.
especially I try to use personally, because I'm a half Puerto Rican, I'm a half white. I try to use identity politics to kill identity politics. You know what I mean? I try to add some
Absolutely.
cognitive dissonance in there so that people will, but your approach is much more of a data centric,
Yes.
facts and things like that. So let's get into a bit of the data. You were talking a second ago about good guys with guns. Can
Yeah.
you speak a little bit to what that looks like in actual practice?
Yeah. For a start, there are 400 million-ish, in excess probably of 400 million guns in private firearms. Let's get that into scale, first of all, just as a bit of background to this. That is the entirety of the military of the United States, plus all of law enforcement of the United States, probably must have been somewhere around 5 million guns between them. There are 400 million guns in private hands in the US. Our violence rate, despite what the press and the gun control crowd would have you believe, is very low. Actually, violent crime, you are more likely to be assaulted in the United Kingdom than you are in the United States. Murder rates are very similar. And I could talk about things like Switzerland and Israel are amongst the most heavily armed populations in the world, and yet they have much lower crime rates and violence rates. But in particular, then you start to get into the good guy with the gun effect. With that 400 million guns being present in around 100 million households, which is easily half of the households in this country, what people have never talked about in the past, the gun control crowd does not like it being announced, is the number of times guns are used defensively. And defensive gun use is most of the time is not somebody shooting a bad guy. The vast majority of the time, it's showing a bad guy that you are armed, and the bad guy goes away because he doesn't want to be shot. And again, for a comparison with England and the United States, in England, home invasions are about 70% of burglaries. In this country, they're about 30%. And they've done surveys of convicted felons to find out why. And the answer is because in America, the convicted felon is afraid of being shot when the homeowner is present. Whereas in the UK, they like the homeowner to be present because it gives them access to wallets and pocketbooks and instant cash.
Wow.
So what we're looking at, we now know the FBI have admitted, there's been CDC studies, we are talking at least 500,000, possibly as many as 3 million defensive gun uses per year. If you divide that down by day and you go for the most likely figure, which is in the region of 2.5 million defensive gun uses a year, that's over 6,000 defensive gun uses every day. This is people who, doesn't matter how old they are, doesn't matter how able they are, doesn't matter what race, color, creed, religion, or anything else they are. The bad guy comes at them. They show that they have a gun. The bad guy goes away. And in the vast majority of cases, nobody gets hurt. And then we have instance after instance that it is often not popularized or put out in the media at all of mass shootings being stopped by a good guy with a gun. And by the way, I would say the police are one of the prime examples of good guys with guns. So it's extremely rare that a mass shooting is stopped not by a gun.
Right.
Albeit it may be the shooter shooting himself, but it's usually because the threat is there that at any moment law enforcement will take them out. So they make sure of themselves. But that's huge. That's 6,000 plus lives being saved, rapes being stopped, violent assaults being stopped. You know, it's what makes, if you actually look at the facts of international violence, it's what makes the United States a very safe country. It's because good people can be trusted with guns. And the founding fathers obviously felt that that was really important.
Right. After the last shooting, and by the way, am I too bassy? Do I sound like I'm too bassy?
I'm no expert on these things, Peter. I have no idea. You don't sound too bassy to me.
Okay. All right. Cool. As far as my experience with one of the last main shootings over here in Texas, there was a huge push. You know, as an example, Pierce Morgan went online and was talking.
May I? I cannot stand the man. He is a dishonest, untrustworthy, self-centered, egotistical piece of crud who had to come to the United States because he lost his career in the United Kingdom, where he was editor of the left-wing rag, the Daily Mirror. And he lost it because he was using the papers, his position as an editor on the paper, to set up stocks and shares so that he personally profited.
Wow. See, we don't even know that stuff over here. We just dislike him in general. So it's good to know. It's good to have facts in our arsenal, you know.
Shows what good taste you have.
Exactly. So Pierce Morgan, you know, and a number of other people online said things like, you know, I don't understand this, you know, why people would even want guns. I went off on a rant and a viral video about just talking about how, you know, I mean, I like to fashion myself a student of history. The last couple of years, especially, I've been digging deep into the Crusades, digging deep into the Magna Carta, digging deep into all these different things, and how I feel like, of all people, England should be more. I mean, it's not that long ago Charles I was doing his, you know, was doing his abuses, and I'm not saying that Cromwell was better. I'm just saying, like, when you know, it's not that long ago that King John was doing his abuses. So to be in a position, like, of all people who should be cognizant of the fact that that people in power can be abusive, and therefore we should keep our arms, it should be England. It should be England.
But like so many English people, basically, have you noticed how the vast majority of those loudly preaching gun control actually have the money, the wherewithal, or the position where they have extra protections over and above the rest of us? They have bodyguards, they have Capitol Hill police, they have all sorts of extra protections that the vast majority of people don't have. Especially, crime in this country is very much focused in certain geographical areas. Most of those are big cities. Most of those are Democrat-led big cities. Most of those have those areas where gun crime is absolutely rampant are gun-free zones effectively, or very strictly controlled gun areas. And I hold up as one shining example my own county where I live in upstate New York. We have not had a gun murder since 1911.
Wow.
A lot of people around here carry. We have not had a gun murder since 1911. And if I let me go, sorry, but that leads to another thought.
Please.
Over the last 30 years, we've seen a lot of states start to go towards constitutional carry. And we're now at the stage where half the states in this country have moved to constitutional carry. You do not need a permit to carry open or concealed. Every time that was floated in front of the voters, the gun control crowd said, oh, blood will flow through the streets. There will be murder and mayhem everywhere. And in every case, in every one of those states, guess what? The crime rate went down. Fact. That is straightforward fact.
Right. And other people can say lots of different things. And in fact, that's what one of the things I posited in that video and was, I mean, this should be good news for people who are scared of violence or scared of crime, is that, you know, similar to what you said, you put it very well, was that, you know, and this is from the CDC's research, from every conceivable place you can find, even though guns have tripled in the United States since 1990, I believe it was.
That is correct.
Crime has dropped in half.
Yep. Every year for the last 30 years, basically, the crime rate pretty much dropped until we get to around the time of, how should we put it, civil unrest, basically centered around COVID restrictions and people getting upset and rioting publicly in the streets. According to CNN, peacefully, but hey, the flames in the background kind of negated that.
Right. And I feel like if we're going to be as accurate, this is part of the reason why I, you know, have this show. It's called CONSERVATISH. You know, sometimes I don't like getting entrenched in any label that's going to keep me from accurately looking at problems and solutions. I don't want to be 100% sold on any sort of politician, 100% sold on any. No, I'm a thinking man, and I like to think, and I like to talk, and I like to listen, and I like to, and I think too often on you know, I appreciate the policy research, how you guys try to approach it from a very bipartisan, you know, okay, regardless of, you know, on thought to action. I was just listening to an episode of, you know, a guy who's a New York civil rights, you know, fighter who was talking about Black Lives Matter in a
jury. Yes, he's a really good guy.
Yeah, he's right, and that's the thing. I have a friend who's a socialist who's been on my show. Is it do we agree? Absolutely not. But we like each other and we can approach each other in good faith, and that's because I don't like getting entrenched in my side to the point of not being able to listen. And one of the things, you know, all conservatives who are listening, cover your ears. But one of the things that I don't like about our side, my side, if there is one, is that too often we knee-jerk just say it's because they hate America. Oh, it's because they're not patriots. It's because it's like, okay, that's keeping us. Not only is that making the people who we're trying to help listen, who we're trying to ingratiate ourselves to, are making them close their ears, making them shut down, and making them put us in a, you know, but it also is not an accurate description of the problem.
No, absolutely. If the being in the military anywhere teaches you one thing, it's that it doesn't matter who, what, where, when, why you are, what your politics, what your race is, what your religion is, we all bleed red.
Right.
And there are people on all sides. I am a gun advocate. I do believe the right to bear arms should be absolute. But that doesn't mean I expect everybody to carry. I understand there are people who don't like guns, and some of them have very good reasons not to. I'm fine with that. But don't stop me from carrying. because you are afraid of guns. Stop telling me what to do. That's bullying. And that's the thing I've stood up against all of my adult life.
Right. And the worst part is that it's bullying under the guise of kindness. It's bullying. It's bullying under the guise of a virtue. I'm a good
virtue
person.
signaling.
Right. I'm going to shut down, as an example. I have been dating somebody recently. I'm, by the way, I'm not, yay. I'm saying I'm dating somebody recently who, is very different politically than I am, let's just say. And she and I have, we got into a bit of not a row, but we got into a bit of a disagreement about some things. But, we're doing it in a good way. But one of the things, the fundamental thing was that all of my standpoint was news to her. Right. She was like, oh, you guys think that? Oh, you guys, interesting. And the reason why it's news is because I, as somebody on this side, I can't turn on any television show. I can't turn on any besides Fox, I guess. But every major university, every major social media company, everywhere I get that side of the argument. I understand where they're coming from. I understand that pro-gun control people are coming from a place of love, and except for the people at the top, the evil, whatever. Yeah. But I think a lot of them, they feel a lot. They want to protect kids, and so they think this is the best way to drain rights out of the people. But it's disturbing to me that they don't even know our standpoint. And they're not even able to. And just to that point where you were talking about bullying, that is bullying. Yeah, I'm against anybody who would be anti-free speech, don't tell me what to do with my body. Don't tell me what to do with my mind, my wallet. Leave me alone.
Absolutely. That is the biggest thing of all. I came to the land of the free to be free, to do anything I want as long as I don't hurt anybody else. That's pretty much the basis of what this country is founded on. Leave me alone and I will leave you alone. I have this, as I say over and over, I have this thing about bullying. And my image is always grandma sat in a not very nice apartment, probably on the 30th floor of an apartment block somewhere in one of the big cities. And all she hears at night is banging and screaming and all the rest. And all she can do is cower there and hope that her door holds. If she had a gun, she would be able to fend off anybody, and nobody would come in because they would know that, she probably had a gun. And if they broke in, they would not survive or like the outcome, shall we say. Right. Guns are a fantastic equalizer, and that's why I'm very strongly for them. And as I say, if you believe, as I do, that the vast majority of this country are good people, law-abiding citizens, why on earth do you want to impose more restrictions on them? What did we do to deserve it? What makes you right? And the one other big thing, Peter, from what you're saying, is that one thing that my liberal friends seem unable to grasp is that if you want to impose restrictions on somebody, there is always a law of unintended consequences. So things like, with the best will in the world, there's the electric vehicle movement. Okay, it cuts some pollution, or does it? If you do the whole life assessment of what it takes to build an electric vehicle and then run it and then dispose of it at the end of its life, it's not very environmentally friendly. And then add to that, around here, if everybody went to electric vehicles, the power grid would collapse. So nobody would be able to go anywhere. People would starve to death. Oh, right. And whose fault would that be? The do-gooders.
Right. It also is, as far as that it's also a blanket of comfort. Like, it's easy to just say, "Oh my God!" Like it's harrowing for all of us. It's extremely disturbing that little kids were shot in school. That is the most abhorrent thing I can think of.
Yep.
But at the same time, to wrap myself in a cloak and a comforting, oh, okay, we're just going to take all the guns away. Number one, it's not going to happen. As you pointed out in that article, you said 400 million roughly.
Yeah, and they will not just evaporate. Some of them will, some will be handed in and destroyed. Some will be buried in the woods. Some will be sold off because people can't afford to just give up their guns. So they are going to sell them off. Then they will go into the black market. And by the way, I would say one of the things I didn't say in that article, I've done estimates and I've done research on this, and I think I can justify saying on top of those 400 million legal guns, plus the 5 million good guy guns, if you like, there are about, in my estimate, 45 million illegal guns in the hands of criminals.
Wow.
That is, almost 10. That's more than 10% of the legal guns.
So when the police confiscate those, does that go into their?
That's where I get my figure from. Basically, Chicago are very good about pushing out how many illegal guns they take off the streets every year, and from that you can extrapolate out and say, as I say, there's probably in the region of 45 million illegal guns on the streets. What law that Congress is going to pass, or any set of legislators is going to pass, is going to disintegrate, vanish those, evaporate those illegal 45 million guns.
Right. Besides the fact that in Chicago, where it's such a restrictive gun control city, there were this last weekend 53 people shot.
Yep.
Right. So
like I said, all of the violence, the vast majority of the gun violence happens in a very few spots. The top 77 cities of the United States are responsible. In fact, it's a few blocks in Chicago. It's a few blocks in Baltimore. It's a few blocks in New York or San Francisco or all of these places. It's actually a relatively small area, and it is the same people over and over committing the vast majority of crimes.
Right. Especially in New York, where they just spit them right back out into the.
Absolutely.
So since obviously this is maybe more of a culture question, but I like to, again, since the fulcrum of this whole situation is not the guns, just like I believe, because as we've said before on this episode, there are more guns, and yet there is less violence. So since the fulcrum of whether or not someone's going to go into a school and kill people is the gun, what is the fulcrum then in your estimate? And if you have any, whether it be a culture idea, whether, what do you think it is?
Let's put it like this. Going into a school and shooting is already illegal. Murder is already illegal. It's a crime. What I believe a lot of the problem is, I don't have the solution, but mental illness is obviously one major problem in this country. What I do know is that, again, in my small county, we used to have a mental health unit. It closed about 5-6 years ago. They're expensive to run and, difficult to keep up. There is a mental health crisis in this country. There's a drug crisis. Drugs are another part of it's a very complicated issue over and over. But the biggest one of the lot to me is that we in New York City, for example, they take criminals off the streets, they catch them with guns, and yet they, with repeated offenses over and over, are the ones that often get the bail reform benefit of the doubt. And the judicial plea system means that if they plead to having, a few ounces of marijuana or whatever, the gun possession is often dropped. Well, that is undoubtedly another chunk of it. And yet another chunk is this business about recidivism and the fact that our prisons may well be overcrowded and badly attended and all the rest. That does not mean you should let people out if they are not in some way reformed. And you have to ask yourself, if criminals come out and reoffend, then the chances that in the future they will be caught, go to jail, be released, and reoffend are very high. Something needs to be done about that too. And my final point on that would be that banning guns because criminals misuse them is no different from banning cars because drunks drive them, or banning knives because, people stab other people with them, or all wonderful, nice la la land solutions that achieve nothing. And the assault weapon ban that specifically that just passed the House of the House of Representatives was done 1994 to 2004 and effectively statistically had almost no effect, or if it did have an effect, it actually raised the crime rate with rifles. Now, the AR-15 has since become the most popular sporting rifle in the country, rightly in my view. It's simple. People are familiar with it, and it has a lot of safety features. And what really annoys me is that the way that they define assault rifle is to define those features that were actually built onto these rifles to make them more accurate. Well, if you make it more accurate, it's safer. And in the hands of a non-criminal, that is a really good thing. And there are way more non-criminals than criminals in this country.
Right. That's a very good point. And I also like, well, let me focus on one thing. I think the biggest thing, I'm with you on all of that, and I think one of the other factors is, and it is very complicated. All of these problems and therefore their solutions are complicated issues. And one of the other factors is that we are not listening to men. We are not caring about men, little boys especially. We have forgotten them. And this is not special pleading by a man. This is the reality of the statistics show that as well. Suicide among men has risen. And I'm not saying that we need to just say feminism. It's not a binary choice, right? I'm saying who are the majority of the people doing these crimes? It's men. Yeah. Okay. How can we help that? It's not by saying you're bad from the start. You're a bad boy. Hey, boy, who was born a boy he didn't have a choice in the matter. He was born, especially a white boy. You are fundamentally bad because of your gender. You are fundamentally bad because of your skin. You are fundamentally bad because of where you come from, and you're Western and you're this and you're that. Saying that does not create an environment where that person feels like he has a place to go, to get help, to ask for help. You know what I mean? Squeezing him in his wallet, squeezing him in the college rate for men is dropping at an incredible rate. I mean, this is, so anyway, that's one of the other factors.
Speaking, absolutely right. Speaking as one who has actually traveled a lot abroad. Some of it in Her Majesty's service, and some of it just because we enjoy traveling and we like going to foreign places. And we don't do it by going to 5-star hotels. We do it by staying in bed and breakfasts and, taking buses and trains and all of that, and getting to know the people in the country. And I've traveled the world. I don't care what color people are. Brown, yellow, white, green, black, blue. It doesn't matter. There are good people and bad people everywhere.
Right.
All the same. What this country and, if you like, the civilized European countries have going for them used to be a system of morals and values that were taught in schools and churches and synagogues, religious centers, and all the rest. And that set of morals and values permeated society.
Right.
We're losing that. And we're losing it at the same time as I say, I think heavily involved in this is a drug culture problem causing mental health issues, which, horse and cart or chicken and egg. I don't know which comes first. I just know it's all mixed together. I haven't got a solution for it, except to say banning guns isn't going to change anything.
Right. And also fundamentally, I think when I look back at again with the good intentions of a lot of the people who are trying to throw out a lot of those traditions, was they're throwing essentially the baby out with the bathwater. They're saying, well, because evil, rightfully so, evil, mentally ill, as an example, priests abused kids. Well, all religion is bad. Whoa, 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 whoa. Like, hang on. What, just because some people, just because some men, as an example, used to, I always go to this statistic as far as England goes. One of the feminist talking points is just like, this idea, this cultural idea that women were just subjugated, and they were, but that women were subjugated and they didn't have any voice, and they, had to be stuck in the kitchen. Okay. Yeah. But a junior officer on the front line during the First World War in France had an average life expectancy of 6 weeks.
Yep.
So I'm not saying, I'm just saying, think about wouldn't it be great if you weren't forced because of your government to go die in France? Wouldn't that be nice too? I'm not saying that it had to be a binary choice, but I'm just saying, think about the complexity of the issues and how, what was it up until 1900? I believe like 95, was it 90 or 95% of the population of the world lived under the poverty line?
Yep.
Like we're doing a lot better.
And I look at other countries, and I've been to places where misogyny is still not just rampant, it's culturally, required. It's even legally required,
right,
in certain countries. And the idea of honor killings, for example, or forced genital mutilation just horrifies me without limitation. And forgive me, but that actually leads me back once again. Why am I such a fan of guns? Because if a woman is about to be raped, but she possesses a firearm, she is not going to be raped. She can at least fight back effectively. That alone, to me, is a good reason not to disarm women.
Not to disarm people of color who live. I had a guy on my show a couple years ago, and I've had lots of others since, but he talked about, he specifically was living, this was during the George Floyd riots, and he was, he said, I grew up in the ghetto in Detroit. I've been shot at twice. Mm-hmm. We want the police. We want guns to protect ourselves. Yep. They're the ones living in the actual consequences of gun control. Yep. And like you said, the people, the rich elites who have security forces around them face zero consequences to their decisions, to their financial donations, to their vote, to their whatever. It's, it's people of color and women and people who are most vulnerable who face the biggest consequences for those.
And in particular, the Beltway elites don't get it. And they don't get things like, I live out in the country. I'm not alone. A lot of us do, where the cops are 20 minutes away. So somebody breaks into my house and I'm supposed to ring up and wait 20 minutes? I don't think so. Now, why should, as I say, I have a concealed carry permit. I think I'm a responsible person. I know I'm a law-abiding citizen. I'm allowed to carry concealed around my area. And yet, if I go into the most frightening part of New York State, otherwise known as Manhattan, I am instantly a felon the moment I cross a geographical line, a political limitation, where suddenly, because I have a gun, I am a danger to society. I'm missing something.
Right.
I'm one of the guys that is actually well trained to stop bad guys with guns. I still practice to this day.
Right.
I am not a gun nut. I am not ever going to be a mass shooter or anything else. It just isn't going to happen. And yet, I cannot legally carry to defend others in the big city or other areas.
Right. I mean, part of the reason I moved from Manhattan to Austin about a month ago was for that very reason. Part of it was because there's no music happening in New York unless you're in Broadway or TV or film. And I know that sounds crazy to people outside of New York City, but it is that nothing's happening there. Everybody still has a culture of not just fear, but it's the same thing as I've talked about ad nauseum on my show. It's the same fear of not fitting in with the woke Joneses
Yep.
as the same thing that killed San Francisco. So I jettisoned myself from there, and I'm going to start performing here in Austin. But also, I want to be around guns. I want to be around people and who not just understand the culture of that, but practice it. And I
Yep.
don't know anybody. Like, one of the main things you realize once you start to dip your toe in the water of am I going to have a gun? Maybe I do, is that everybody is responsibility, safety, responsibility. They're constantly training. They're constantly thinking about it. They're going to classes.
And despite taking it really seriously, we have fun doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. I was in Houston actually a couple months ago, or about a year ago. And a friend took me to the gun range, and I looked around and smiling, whatever. It felt serious, for a second. But also, by the way, all you white liberals, I'm just saying, there were a lot of black people there, and a lot of Indian people there, and a couple of Chinese people, or Asian people. I'm saying that there was all, it wasn't like, oh, these white crazy right wing, like, guys, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, just go into a gun range, talk to us who enjoy guns, who appreciate guns, talk and listen, because you're not listening,
And have a go yourself until you've tried it. At least understand, please, what an assault weapon really is. The Sturmgewehr was a term invented by Hitler during World War II. It was an automatic hand-carried weapon. The AR-15 is not an assault weapon by anybody's definition, except the desperate gun banners.
Nice. Lastly, and I know, thank you so much, Tim, for joining me
My
on the show.
pleasure.
This has been a great conversation. Just lastly, one of the things that we've been talking about is the data centric. The fact that those guns in America, if the gun banners had their druthers, would not evaporate. What happened to Australia? I know that didn't they do a gun buyback?
Yes. Gun buybacks. There's a topic. I mean, what happens they have gun buybacks in Chicago, and what happens is that the bad guys will bring a $30 BB gun and get $100 for it.
Interesting.
Yeah, you can make a profit on buybacks if you know what you're doing, and trust me, the bad guys learn very quickly how to take advantage.
Right.
And bring up your broken guns, bring up your tired guns, and make the cops think that maybe you're a good guy after all. Australia, I have a wonderful relationship with some Australians, and all I can say is I admire their rugby, I admire their cricket, and England for the World Cup.
You're right. Right. As far as the actual, I mean, and I know it sounds like fear mongering everybody, but the reality is the reality. I had a friend in New York, and when I visited China a couple of years ago, I felt this air, even though the individuals were very kind and generous, and the coffee was expensive, but everything else was, and I don't like spitting indoors, but everything else was like a cool experience. But there was an air of vibration of, we just are waiting for the government to tell us what to do. If they wanted to pull the trigger on us, there is nothing we can do.
Yep.
If they wanted to be, and they already are, we're just kind of at the mercy of what the government tells us to do. And I saw that same thing around the lockdowns, regardless of whatever you stand on it. Even like if some people disagree, like there was some horrendous stuff going on in Australia, and I just don't want that to happen to us.
Sweden, on the other extreme, had no lockdown, no school closures, no mask mandates, and still have the lowest infection rate in the world. Isn't that fascinating? And internationally, talking about China, my wife and I have been to China a number of times. We love Hong Kong. I think it was the greatest, most fantastic foreign city in the world. It's been completely subsumed by China and is now just a part of the Greater Bay Area, which is just such a disgrace. And the people of Hong Kong. I was a Thatcherite. I freely admit it. But Maggie Thatcher got it completely wrong on handing Hong Kong back to China. But maybe that's a topic for another time.
Sure, right. This has been a great conversation, Tim. Thank you so much for joining me.
Very much my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Peter.
Absolutely. And again, please share about the London Center for Policy Research.
LondonCentre.org is where we can be found. Like I say, it's the Herb London Centre. It's not the London England Centre. The London Centre for Policy Research at LondonCentre.org. And we also have a Thought to Action YouTube channel and patreon.com/Thought to Action. Please join us there.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Mr. Wilson. Wherever you're listening, everybody, please go ahead and share, go ahead and like and subscribe, and see, everybody, I'm doing the right, all the things I'm supposed to do on TikTok. And you can find me on Instagram at Peter_Feliciano and on Twitter at Rule62Peter. Thank you again, Mr. Wilson, for joining me. I'll go ahead and end the.
Very much my pleasure. Thanks, Peter. All the best. Be safe. Yes. And if you can't be safe, be careful.
I will. Take care, sir.